Hi Ian, we're live.
Okay, thank you very much. So welcome to this week's First Tuesday Business Webinar from Aberystwyth Business School. I'm Ian Harris, and I'll be taking you through the session today. The title of this particular session is Netflix Devours Blockbuster, Burps and Chews on Hollywood. It was quite difficult for me to come up with that particular title. But the bottom line is it's trying to explain that within the home rental industry, Blockbuster was the market leader. Netflix very quickly circumvented that particular lead and now really is impressing its will on Hollywood. So we've got some contributors to this month's presentation. I'd like to thank Professor John Goddard and Mr. Alex Glasser for their contributions of facts and interesting sort of topical areas. So let's just recap. Drivers for business evolution. Why do businesses evolve? Well, there's regular innovation in industry with products, prices, places. They're all changed quite regularly because the businesses are trying to maintain revenue and profitability. So they will innovate new products, they will modify existing products, they will move prices up, they will bundle price, they will penetrate price, and they will change the way they distribute their goods and services. So innovation is not unheard of in industry. Entrepreneurs, though, spot opportunities that other businesses seem to miss, and the innovation that these entrepreneurs spot fundamentally alters competition. And as we saw from Amazon last week, this changes what consumers want forever. And we mentioned it as a dilemma for the incumbent organizations when we last discussed this. So we've got 3 lessons today. We'll look at lesson 1, business evolution and innovation. So innovation basically creates a change in an environment, and that change is often responded to by other organizations in that industry, and some sort of jostling for position often arises from that. But the reality is that all organizations, all businesses in an industry need to maintain a position, and that requires investment or reinvestment of profits. And many businesses are seen as revenue generators. So if you look at the Arcadia Group news from yesterday and today, you will see that Philip Green has basically asset stripped that business for about 15 years. No intention of investing or reinvesting heavily. And it was just about maximizing the revenue and the profitability that business would provide. Didn't want to evolve it, didn't want to innovate, didn't want to enter the digital age, really, and the sort of the boohoo environment. So that's because there are benefits to innovation, but there are costs that are greater. And lots of organizations wish to innovate, but because they fear the risk, they don't innovate as effectively as they might. So innovation really is the acceptance of risk. And Kodak in the top right-hand corner was the world market leader for cameras and for photographic.
Hi Ian. Ian, sorry to interrupt. We can't actually see the slides at the minute.
Oh,
just to let you know.
What's happened there? Can you see them now?
I'm afraid not. No, just you on camera.
Oh, that's weird. Okay, so I'll just turn the screen share off.
There we go. You can see another screen.
You can see it now, yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. So really, innovation is the acceptance of risk. So what I was saying with Kodak was that they actually were destroyed by the emergence of digital cameras, because Kodak's basically a chemicals company, or was a chemicals company, and they created the first charge coupled device for photo imaging in the early 70s, but they didn't do anything with it. They chose not to develop that further because they were making substantial profits from basically selling chemical papers. And Blockbuster had the same problem. Blockbuster was a physical distribution vehicle, basically just hiring out movies, which had just come from cinema, and we're now in the sort of video rental. They started in the 80s with VHS videotapes, and they migrated into DVDs and games. And basically, they were like a cinema when you went in, but you would just pick your title, choose your sweets and goodies for the night, and then take them home. But ensuring that you brought them back within 24 hours, otherwise you would have a swingeing fine. And Blockbuster never made huge amounts of revenue. Sort of 6 billion-ish was roughly the norm in the noughties. And you can see that they fell off the cliff between 2010 and 2012. And on the other scale, the red scale, you can see that Netflix isn't typically generating a great deal of revenue either at the point of inflection where they exist and Blockbuster no longer exists. So let's have a quick look at some Netflix prehistory. So Netflix was founded by a technologist, a guy called Reed Hastings, who had in 1996-7 sold a company that he developed called Puratria, and he generated $700 million as a result of that. And he and a guy called Mark Rudolph co-founded Netflix. And Mark Rudolph had experience of place distribution, shop front distribution. And between them, they came up with this value proposition that basically the movies that they would rent would be flat fee, unlimited rentals, no due dates, no late fees, shipping and handling fees are all included, and there were no per title rental fees. Very different to the Blockbuster value proposition. So the problem up to this point is that physically distributing movies through the post was difficult. So Blockbuster's place model was justified and generated very good revenue for them and very, very high profitability. However, at this time, 1997, 1998, DVDs were being released into the US when Reed and Mark were toying with this idea. So whereas they couldn't easily or safely or reliably ship videotapes, they could ship DVD discs. So Netflix was founded in 1997 with a seed investment by Reed of $2.5 million. It employed 30 people, had 925 DVD titles. And basically what it did is it put DVD discs in the post, sent them out to a subscriber. That subscriber sent that DVD back and then was allowed to take another DVD title. So typically there was a gap of 3 to 5 days between receiving the DVD, watching it and sending it back and being able to order the next one. So one of the innovations was to move it from a per title rental to a monthly subscription. And that subscription, by 2000, 3 years after, generated 300,000 subscribers. Not a huge number of people when you think there are 370 million people in the US, but alongside those 300,000 subscribers, they generated a $57 million loss. Now, that's a significant loss for one trading year. So sending and receiving physical DVDs was an expensive innovation and needed economy of scale. And it was quite obvious from the first 3 years that Netflix had been incorporated that that economy of scale wasn't arriving at that point in time. So they decided to divest. This is one of the options that all organizations have. Reed Hastings, being an entrepreneur, would recognize that he wanted to try to get some of his money back. So he actually took Netflix to Blockbuster and said, look, for $50 million, you can buy Netflix off me. For everything. You can buy my title, you can buy the actual business, you can buy the internet facade that is Netflix. And what he proposed was that the online business would be called Netflix and the Blockbuster would continue to physically distribute DVDs via their stores. Strangely enough, Blockbuster weren't interested. They couldn't understand why they would pay $50 million for a business with 300,000 subscribers, making a $57 million loss. And basically what Blockbuster was seeing was that Netflix had low relative market share and the market growth rate was low. So basically it was a dog. This is obviously the Boston Consulting Group matrix. Reed Hastings was saying, actually, we think the market growth rate is going to be high, but we only have a relatively small market share. So we think we're a question mark and you should pay $50 million for us. And this is quite interesting because if we look at the diffusion of innovation, we'll see that there's something called the chasm. And Netflix hit the chasm at the innovator stage at 2.5% and less. So normally that chasm emerges between the early adopters and the main majority. For Netflix, it was distinctly hit at the innovators' early adopters level. And this again is what Blockbuster saw. So whilst it would seem sort of silly for Blockbuster to be criticized for missing this opportunity. The reality was that very, very few people at this point in 2000 were actually consuming DVDs. However, between 2000 and 2001, this process of diffusion grows, and these early adopters start adopting DVD technology very significantly. The retail price of players dropped from $500 to $200. So what's a moderately involved purchase decision now becomes a let's just buy it. It's sort of pin money. Technology adoption basically saved the nascent company and provided them with the economies of scale. Because if people are buying DVD players, then they probably want to rent DVDs that they can put in them or buy DVDs. So the entrepreneurs sniffed a payback opportunity, and on May the 29th in 2001, the initial public offering of Netflix on Wall Street was provided 5.5 million shares of common stock at $15 a share. So between 2000 and 2001, a $57 million loss became the generation of market capitalization of $82.5 million. And this is quite significant because this was the start of the romance between Netflix and Wall Street, which is like the FTSE 100 center in North America. So obviously now we're moving through the early adopters into the early majority, and now all sorts of interesting things happen. By 2003, they make their first profit. So 2 years after this IPO, they make $6.5 million, the profit margin of 2.4%. Unilever, so a company that might provide you with Thai food tea or Domestos, they would expect 24% profit margin. Netflix was quite happy to have a profit margin of 2.4. If we move on, 2007, all of a sudden an innovation emerges. In 2005, YouTube had sort of shown the world that streaming could be considered a useful way of consuming content. And we know that physical distribution was an issue for Netflix. So by 2007, they started looking into how they could stream. When Netflix was incorporated, to just download one single definition movie from the internet would take 8 days solid without any interruptions. But data speeds and bandwidth costs were reducing. 2 to 5 megabits per second were common. Downloading movies was becoming more common. Streaming had already been proved by YouTube, but also by Amazon Video, which was launched 6 months before Netflix. So they introduced a product innovation called Netflix Watch Now, launched to work on PCs with Internet Explorer, 1,000 titles, providing 18 hours free streaming per month. And they partnered with Microsoft, they partnered with Apple, they partner with Nintendo. They're just desperately trying to get environments within which they can stream content to end user devices, because that will allow them to grow their market share. Because if we take a look at their market share through 2002, 3, 4, and 5, we can see that their growth rate is tiny. And even by 2010, North America only accounted for 20 million subscribers. So after 13 years of being in business, 20 million subscribers is not a huge amount. You can also see that from 2010, they start migrating across into international. Okay, so time for a quick survey. If you were Blockbuster, what would you have done? So I believe that Andy's going to put that link in the chat box for you to have a look at. So somebody's in trying to negotiate a lower offer. That's not a bad choice. And £25 million or $25 million now would seem like quite a bargain, really. With 2 responses now, I would have made. Let's just enlarge this because I forgot what my questions are. I would have made the same mistake. Yeah, I think you and I roughly are the same on this one. I think I would have made the same mistake on this. And if I was Blockbuster, I'd have told them to jog on. So a little bit of a mix. So I'm assuming that you can still see this. The next first Tuesday is on the 2nd of February, so we're going to take a month off in January because some schools aren't back when it comes to the first Tuesday in January. So let's move on to the second lesson. How does Netflix disrupt content and the creation of content? What's it going to do over the next decade or so, from 2007-8 onwards, that leads to a fundamental change in Hollywood? Okay, so Netflix depends on content. It is a content distributor. So how did Netflix become the dominant force in entertainment? Now, this is the quote from Reed Hastings, that he wanted Netflix to become the dominant force in entertainment. Of course, Hollywood is the dominant force in entertainment. Well, when they started seeking content to stream, they realized that they needed to partner with typical organizations that would normally be providing content. And they approached a company called AMC, which is a US media company, to see if they could sublease content from them. Because 2008 was the credit crunch, cash flows were impacted in the media industry, and AMC just said, yeah, okay, we'll sell you some of our content. One of the contents that was sold was a show called Breaking Bad. Now, Breaking Bad didn't work on terrestrial or on-demand TV, just did not work. It was too complicated. People couldn't follow the plot lines from one week to the next. The recap was 10 minutes long to get you to speed to what you needed to remember to be able to follow the next episode. So these things have long narrative arcs, and they really didn't work. And basically, by the time the final series of Breaking Bad existed, in the first week of streaming on Netflix, there were more viewers of Breaking Bad in the first week of the final series than there had been for all of the other series and episodes up to that point in time. They also got lucky by partnering with an organization called Starz. Starz was a reseller used by HBO home box office. That's kind of the BBC Sky equivalent in North America, the prestige market leader. And Starz had created its own streaming product. So again, 2008, there's lots of activity in this area called Vongo. Unfortunately, Vongo was losing $70 million per annum and needed cash because home box office is not going to keep on sort of shoring up an organization that's hemorrhaging cash. They offered Netflix a sub-license for $30 million per annum. That included most of the Disney back catalog, Star Wars, Pirates, Marvel, and also the Disney back catalog for $30 million per annum, allowing Netflix to get a great deal of content from the market-leading production companies. So between 2008 and 2012, Netflix continues to release lots of this great content produced by its competitors who own its distribution and IPR. Remember that Netflix is just a content distributor. At this point, it owns none of its own content. And Reed Hastings can't understand why competitors are providing with access to great content, but he knows at some point the penny will drop. They're actually feeding the success of Netflix. It takes until 2017 for Disney to realize this. So 10 years after streaming becomes established, Disney starts planning its retaliation. It didn't launch Disney Plus until 2019. In 2013, it moves into content creation, created the House of Cards. They paid $100 million for the first series of House of Cards. It was executively produced by David Fincher. David Fincher is a huge Hollywood star. He's a director with an awfully impressive back catalogue: Fight Club 7, Gone Girl, Zodiac, Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, Alien 3, Panic Room, some seminal movies. So basically, they're signaling to Hollywood that they're serious about becoming a leader in home entertainment. They also launched a niche product called Orange is the New Black, and they learned a great deal from the creation of this particular title, in such that what should be niche content can actually have much wider distribution capabilities. And they use that understanding of niche to uncover new content and to popularize it, to democratize it. And really what they were doing is they were trying to offset this impact, and this is intellectual property rights. So if I create an asset, a film, a series, then I own the rights of that series for a number of years, 15, 20, 30, 50, or even 100 years. And that means that if I own the content, I can choose how I want that content licensed. So as soon as Netflix becomes remotely successful commercially, then it needs to be able to create its own content, because if it can't, the people that they normally get it from will A, start charging them much more money for it, and B, when they think that they're being threatened, will stop supplying them. It's like turning the water tap off. You can no longer get the materials that you want. So in Hollywood, in 2010, Hollywood typically created 200 new series a year. They actually create about 600 movies per year typically, but 200 new series were created in Hollywood in 2010. By the beginning of 2020, that had grown to approximately 500 new series per year. So we can see that the content is being accelerated until you take a look at who's commissioning those shows. And Netflix commissioned 370 of those new shows between 2019 and 2020. By default, Netflix had become a content factory. Now, content has a very long life cycle. It's worth something for many, many years. And this is supporting Netflix's affiliation with Wall Street, because what Wall Street is now funding is they're funding the development of content, and that content has value, can be resold, reused, repurposed, or even franchised off in lots of different ways over time. So the industry has some competitive responses. Obviously, you can imagine that Blockbuster has been destroyed. The big media companies have been looking at this and thinking this isn't particularly serious until about 2013, 2014. And then all of a sudden they start slowly understanding what's about to hit them. So AT&T, which is kind of like the EE of North America, buy HBO, and they release HBO Max. Disney started planning Disney Plus in 2017. They had to buy Fox to beef up their content platform, and they launched that in 2019. Apple TV Plus is relaunched. It was originally launched in 2007. In the UK, we have UK TV, BritBox, NBC, a 4-player, 5 on demand, and iPlayer. We also have NBC.com, and that looks very much like a Netflix stream from about 4 or 5 years ago. That was captured about a week ago. Stars Play, remember Stars? This is their push. This is this high quality content, again, moving into the sort of Netflix area. So the argument that you could say is, why didn't Blockbuster or Hollywood act sooner? Why did they ignore Netflix? Well, part of the reason for that is Netflix is seen as a technology company. It's not seen as a media company. It's built off the back of a distribution platform and algorithms that sort of provide you with content that it thinks you will find useful. But it still asks the question, and it's all about money, really. Disney renegotiated the contract with Netflix in 2014-15, so they weren't paying $30 million per annum, they were paying $300 million per annum. But they were still providing foundational content to a quickly growing competitor. And you can see Netflix compared to Disney there. It's by far the £800 gorilla. And this is the nicest way of putting it. Why did Hollywood feed the £200 chimp so that it became the £800 gorilla? Okay, so quick question for you. Who will win the streaming wars? So if Andy puts the link in the chat box, we'll see what responses we get. Okay. So it looks like you think that Netflix will win. Interestingly, most of the media commentators think that Disney Plus is going to win this particular argument. And when you read around this, you'll see that lots of other people think that there's still someone out there that hasn't really emerged yet that will win this. But I'll be frank, looking at the track record of Netflix, I tend to agree with you that Netflix is about to win the streaming wars and is likely to tie up this particular activity in the same way that Sky satellite TV sewed up the digital sort of satellite solution. So lesson 3, being classed a tech is advantageous for investment. I'm just going to briefly talk you through this. If you take a look at Netflix's annual revenue, what we have is in 2007, it's making just over $1 billion. By 2017, it's got a scale jump, a 10-factor increase to 11 billion. In 2019, it put in 20 billion. It's making about $1 billion profit. So it's generating an awful lot of revenue. But when you compare that with the subscriber growth rate, you can see that the subscriber growth rate is not necessarily particularly J-shaped prior to quarter 1 2020. And you know that the pandemic led to a surge in subscriber numbers for both Disney Plus when it was launched in the UK in April, May, but also for Netflix. And this is really good in the short term for Netflix. If you compare Apple's share price against Netflix's share price, what you can see is that Apple has just about doubled its share price in the last 3 years. So it's up 108%. Whereas Netflix has almost trebled its share price. So the investors really think there's a lot of value in Netflix. And that would be sort of an interesting story until you compare the revenue performance of Apple to Netflix. So Apple in the last 4 quarters made $268 billion. Netflix in the last 4 quarters, I could get reliable figures for $21 million. So it's been 12 times smaller at least. But for some reason, the share price keeps on increasing. And that's because of this love affair that Wall Street has with Netflix. And here's another way of showing this. This is known as a price-earnings ratio. And what you do here is you take the share price and you divide it by its earnings. And the higher the number, the bigger disparity between what the company is valued at and the amount of revenue that they generate. So Netflix is valued very highly, but generates very, very low earnings, okay? Whereas Apple is not valued as highly when compared with its earnings. And what you can see here is that Amazon and Netflix, even within the FANGs, so this is Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google, even within the FANGs, Amazon and Netflix really sort of jump out as being much more geared towards future growth potential. And that future growth potential is another way of saying risk. The investors are betting on that the innovations that those companies are bringing to market will lead to increased future growth potentials. Okay, so let's just do the first Tuesday lessons recap. The first lesson really is that competition exists outside the industry. Porter's competitive forces tells us that there's competition within an industry. We have rivalry, we have bargaining powers of suppliers and customers. We have the threat of new entrants, for example. But the bottom line is that competition in technology-enhanced environments often exists outside of the industry that your company works within. Lesson 2, seek the low-hanging fruit. Often it's easy to try and find the difficult things to solve. And where a company like Netflix has really benefited is that they've just very serendipitously been culling this low-hanging fruit and growing the value proposition of the business by having some advantages. And this is the classical case of a charismatic entrepreneur. And Reed Hastings is a very charismatic entrepreneur in the same way that Steve Jobs was for Apple. and Jeff Bezos is for Amazon. And lesson 3, well-run innovators will secure funding. Because really what Wall Street and the investment community are looking for is they're looking for novel ideas. And they're looking for novel ideas that they think will return on investment over a period of time. And that period of time is normally 3 to 5 years. And that's why Reed Hastings was trying to divest in 2000. You could see that he wasn't generating. And venture capitalist says after 3 years, if you're not generating profits, then you should really be moving out of that environment. But well-run innovators over time will secure funding. And that is particularly problematic for traditional media companies because they can't compete. They're not tech companies. They're not given the same benefits as tech companies get. And therefore, it's unfair competition. Okie doke. That's it. Thank you very much.